My name is Megan O'Rourke, and I'm the Associate Director of Regional Programs for the University of San Diego Alumni Association. I'm also a proud alumna of the class of 2015. Before we begin today's session, I hope you all had a nice holiday weekend celebrating safely in person or virtually with family and friends. We are happy to have you for today's session, the North County San Diego Torero Club event, Hiring and the Job Search in the COVID Era. During this time, the USD Alumni Association is focusing our efforts on programming that is of the greatest need to our alumni. Since the beginning of the pandemic, many individuals are looking to hire or be hired more than ever before. So we're happy to be joined by today's featured speaker, Ken Schmidt, class of 1992, and founder and owner of Turning Point Executive Search, to provide expertise on the subject and help answer any pressing questions from the audience. We will begin the program with a brief overview of Ken and his company, and then we will spend the majority of today's conversation covering the new world of working from home, tips on getting hired, networking, interviewing, and Q&A at the end. For preferred viewing preferences, please go ahead and change your view to speaker view and hide non-video participants. However, this is meant to be a highly interactive conversation, so please feel free to turn on your camera and ask questions as we go. At this time, I'd like to introduce Ken Schmidt, and we will go ahead and get started with our conversation. Hi, Ken, how's it going?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here.
All righty, so we'll get started. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about Turning Point Executive Search?
Sure, thanks. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad you all could make it this morning. And for those that are on the East Coast, I know it's kind of lunchtime for you, so thanks for being here as well. As Megan mentioned, my name is Ken Schmidt. I graduated from USD back in '92 undergrad with a degree in econ, and I've been in San Diego my whole life. So my company is called Turning Point Executive Search. I started it 13 years ago, back in 2007, but before the really big financial crash. And I've been in recruiting now for going on 23 years, so quite some time. I came out of USD, worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car for 5.5 years, and then left there and got into the recruiting world in early 1998, way back when we still had ads in newspapers and LinkedIn was not even existing. It was a very, very different world back then for recruiting. So my company, Turning Point, we're based here in San Diego. We've been virtual actually since day one, so for all 13 years. So not much of a transition for us and my team in terms of the pandemic, but as you might expect, the majority of our clients are going through a pretty big change out there right now with the changeover. In terms of our business, so my team is all here locally. We are virtual, as I mentioned. It's myself and I have 6 employees, and we focus on placing people at the mid and senior levels. So really kind of going not so much by title, but more by compensation level. So minimum salaries of $100,000 and up. Over the years, I've done different levels of recruiting across the board, more junior, more senior, and everything in between. So we work with a pretty wide variety of industries, a lot of technology, software, cybersecurity, as you might expect, also a lot of biotech and medtech, but also more traditional companies like automotive. Kia Motors of North America is our single biggest client. ESET, the big cybersecurity software company downtown, we placed their president as well. And then we have a lot of small 5, 10, $20 million companies that you've never heard of. But we've done a lot of work for them. And our real, kind of sweet spot, if you will, is placing people in sales, marketing, also operations, supply chain, operations, general management, quality control, and then executive level C-suite executives as well. So those are the areas that we really focus on. I have in the past done a lot of recruiting for accounting and finance also, so I'm pretty familiar with that space as well. But yeah, so our firm is fantastic. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing team. We all work very, very closely together. I'm a very, very big believer in marketing. So even for a team as small as we are, we have 2 marketing folks, a digital marketing manager, and also our director of marketing and operations. So we're very big on really creating and sharing content and thought leadership pieces as much as possible, either video interviews or infographics or blogs. It's a really, really important piece of what we do out there. So we're going to answer a lot of questions as we go through the conversation this morning. That gives you a general idea of kind of how we operate. In terms of kind of just our business model, so you have a grasp of that. So we are what's called a 2-sided business. meaning that we have to have both, both our company clients. So companies, like ESET or Kia Motors, they come to us, they hire us, and they pay us a fee to fill their positions. And they're usually, or almost always, pretty difficult to fill roles. So very specialized, very niched. So we're no good to those companies if we don't have great candidates, right? And also we're no good to our candidates community if we don't have great companies that we're representing. So we're always kind of in this balancing act of developing our network, both for the company side as well as for the candidate side also. So it's a lot of fun. As you might expect with COVID, things have been quite a bit different this year, but no year is the same as the previous one. There's always a lot of change out there.
Wonderful. So Ken, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about, why recruiting? How did the company begin, and speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So as I said, I've been in recruiting now it's been 23 years, so quite a while. I enjoyed every minute of it. It's a fantastic place to be. Every hour is different, every day is different, and just that variety and that kind of uncertainty, if you will, is a lot of fun. I had a boss once who's still a mentor of mine say that, as a recruiter, we're in the business of changing people's lives. And I could not phrase it any better than that. People come to us, companies come to us looking for something better, either better employees or a candidate saying, I want a better job, a shorter commute or more money or more career development. So the ability for me to be involved in that day in and day out is extremely fulfilling. It's fantastic. My whole team, so I'm the only man. I have 6 employees, and it's 6 women and myself. I have been a very big believer from day one in the fact that there's a lot of great people out there, moms and dads, that had a career, then took some time to stay home, either to take care of their elderly parents or take care of their own kids, and then wanted to get back into the workforce, but didn't want to have to suit up and go to an office every day, right? And so the network that I have and the inquiries that I made in my network led me to all of my staff, all having, all being women that are moms as well. When I first started Turning Point back in 2007, my wife was working full time, as was I. I had 2 young kids at the time, and I decided to work from home so that I could also be home with them, picking them up from school, making dinner and homework and those kind of things. And that's actually what wound up attracting my team to the organization as well. So we all have kids, we all have family that we're obviously working with and dealing with, especially now where everybody's at home. And so it's just been a wonderful way to build a very family-oriented feel at our company, based on that.
Ken, I think that's really special, especially during these times. A lot of people have had to move to a more family-oriented model when it comes to working from home. So you guys were already set up pretty nicely for that. So it's good to hear that that's something that you find to be very valuable. And then the last question before we get into the hard-hitting questions for the audience is, what is the most rewarding part of owning your own business and most challenging?
That's great. It depends on what day you ask me, right? It changes from day to day. So I grew up in a family where, my dad was a Jack in the Box franchisee for my whole life. So I was very familiar with the ups and downs of being a business owner. My mom was in real estate. She left accounting to get into real estate. So I was very, well versed, if you will, in the pros and cons of being self-employed. And that was still always a goal of mine. The opportunities and the parts that are fulfilling is that, when something goes well, you share in that, right? And you feel like, you had a stake in that, if you will. When my employees excel at something, when you see them growing and developing their own careers, it's just an amazing feeling. And the ability to remain a small firm. Our goal is to get to about 10, 11 employees total. I don't want to get to be too big because it allows us to be much more agile. And being a business owner, if you will, entrepreneurial business owner in an agile company allows a lot more flexibility for decision making. On the flip side, as you might expect, the challenges are there day in and day out, having to make payroll, where's the next, client going to come from? I do all the business development for our firm. I don't have a dedicated salesperson. So I'm kind of running or wearing a kind of dual hats at all times, running the operation, but also bringing clients in so we actually have revenue. So that's probably the most stressful piece is just, working my tail off to make sure that we have, clients and revenue coming in the door. But even with those stressors, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ken, for giving us a little bit of background on yourself and Turning Point Executive Search. So now we'll go ahead and begin our conversation about some of the things that individuals on this call can learn, whether they are looking to hire or get hired. So we'll jump right into it and start with the new world of working from home and its impact on business leaders and employees.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great time. And for those that sent in questions beforehand, thank you very much. There was a lot of crossover in the questions, as you might expect, given the COVID situation right now. Things are certainly a bit challenging. So working from home, as we're all probably doing right now, or at least the vast majority of us, has really changed the world of recruiting and interviewing and onboarding and training and learning for companies and employees alike. It's been very different. And so, the good news is that, pre-COVID, a lot of companies were very resistant to allowing employees to work from home. They were convinced that if they couldn't see their employees, then there's no way the employees were actually performing and being productive. But now that we've all been forced into that, and so many companies now realize, oh, not only are my employees, doing a good job, they're doing a better job in a lot of cases, and they're happier, right? They're more engaged. They're not wasting time traveling, commuting to and from an office. And for those that used to have to travel, nonstop, it's fantastic to have that time at home instead of being on a plane all the time. So that's fantastic. That's the positive part of it. When it comes to management, if you're in a manager role, that you've had to really change up your entire style and approach. Managing somebody that's in your office, or cubicle next to you is very, very different than when you have to manage them when they're at home, dealing with all the issues and challenges with that home dynamic. So there's been a lot of change from that perspective, working from home. But I will tell you that I think it's a trend that's here to stay. I think even, if we're having this conversation a year from now, I still think, about 30 or so % of people out there will be working from home at least a couple of days a week. I don't think people are going to go back to 100% working in the office all the time, unless you have to because you're on a manufacturing type job or that kind of thing. But even in that case, there'll be some shifts that'll be happening differently than what happened before. So I think work from home is certainly here to stay longer term, without question.
Alrighty, and speaking of working from home, people, a lot of individuals are doing that right now. However, there's a lot of individuals who normally would go in for an interview process in person, but are having to do it virtually. So we talked a little bit about working from home, but now can we talk about interviewing from home and what that's like for individuals and what they can prep for and what the differences are moving forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great topic. And I touch on this with pretty much every conversation I have every day right now. So I would say, the overarching theme I would say is that, spend the same amount of time prepping for an at-home interview as you would have if you went in for an in-person interview, right? Making sure that you are, dressed to succeed. You're bringing, a pen and a pad with you. You've done your research on the company. You know the players, the folks that are interviewing you. You've got a list of questions prepared also. That same amount of preparation has to happen with in-home interview, with the added component, if you will, of looking behind you before you turn your camera on, right? So an example, so one of my employees actually I was joking with her last week. She was telling me how, she had done, as a recruiter, obviously the interviews she used to do in person are now virtual. And so she had had a full day of interviewing candidates for a high level position that we were trying to fill. And she didn't realize until halfway through the day that, behind her in her home office was her 3-year-old's potty chair, right? So, she was kind of laughing about it. It was pretty funny. I'm sure all the folks that she interviewed with, got a kick out of it. But that's kind of a funny example. There are other situations where we've gotten feedback from clients that have interviewed our candidates that have said, yeah, you know what, that first impression was not very good, right? Because the lighting wasn't right. It was a big glare behind them. One case, somebody actually looked like they were in their bathroom. You could see kind of the towel hanging on the door and those kinds of things. And I know, we don't all have the luxury of having a dedicated home office. I realize that's a challenge. But just make sure that you're looking around you to ensure that whatever's in the profile, if you will, behind you on the camera is professional. It's gonna provide or present you in the right way, in the right image. That's super important. And dressing for success is exactly the same. So I've got a sweater on today. If I was in person doing this, I'd probably have kind of a suit jacket but no tie. So same kind of thing. Don't show up in sweats and a t-shirt. Don't show up with a hat on. Make sure that you are dressing the same way you would professionally as you would if you went into the office for an in-person interview.
Awesome. So it looks like we have a couple of questions that are coming through the chat, but one specifically based off of the conversation that we're having right now is about Zoom background fillers. And are they good for interviews or distracting? Something like what I have.
Exactly right. Yeah, so a lot of people use those. It's very common. I think it's great. I would say, I typically talk with my hands a lot. I'm trying not to right now, so I don't make you all dizzy. But if you move around a lot during an interview, as you all know, that green screen gets distorted, and you don't want to detract from, your first impression with an employer or prospective employer. So just be aware of that. This is my home office here. Obviously, it's pretty straightforward. If you don't want to use a background, that's fine. If you do, choose a professional picture. Don't make it a picture of you at the beach in your bathing suit with your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is. Make sure it's professional. Make sure it's pretty bland, pretty basic, right? So I think it's okay to use it as long as you're using the right one.
Great. One of the things that I had meant to ask you prior to this bit was the art of applying to online job posts. What's the art to it? How do individuals get past that initial phase and move into phase two? And talking about a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. No, yeah, happy to address that too. And I saw a couple of questions coming through also about folks that have been out of work for a while, whether it's been 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever it is. And so this is kind of part of the answer to this question, Megan. Also, in all cases, whether it's during a pandemic or not, boom years, challenging years, whatever it might be, you want to do whatever you can to build and then rely on your network for job search, right? Applying to a job just through a job posting somewhere, it's never going to be your best resource. In fact, usually it's about 12 to 15% of people at most ever get a job through a job posting, right? It's the same percentage, about 10, 15% that get a job through a recruiter or a search firm like ours, which, even at the highest number, that's 30% total get a job from a recruiter or from a job posting. And in reality, most people think that everybody gets a job that way. But the other 70% of people are getting jobs through networking. Someone that they know at the company that they're targeting, a referral source, somebody that they know through their church or their neighborhood or their kids school, whatever it might be. Making sure that you've got a succinct and effective elevator pitch, and that you're telling people that you're looking for a new position and asking them for help. You're not asking them for a job. You're asking them for help. And that help consists of, if you will, it consists of, them keeping you top of mind. They might have someone that they know that runs a company that you could talk to for an informational interview. That kind of networking is always going to be much, much more preferred than applying to a job posting. So I would go with that first. If you are going to apply to a job posting, and again, there are some good ones out there, don't get me wrong, but again, keep those percentages in mind that I mentioned before. If you are going to apply, before you apply, try to find some connection that you have to that company. It could be somebody that went to USD that works with that organization. It could be a search firm like me. You can say, hey, Ken, I'm trying to get interviews set up with ABC company. Do you have any contacts out there? It could be folks that you used to work with at your old company. It could be folks from your high school, your college. It doesn't make a difference. Try to find a way, usually through LinkedIn, which is a great tool for that. Find a way to make a connection out there. Ask them, ask them two things. A, are they aware of the open position, and do they have any insights about the role? And B, ask them if their company has any kind of an employee referral program. What I mean by that is a lot of companies will actually pay a bonus to a current employee of a company if they refer somebody in that gets hired. And so it's a benefit to them and obviously to you if you can make that connection and find some incentive, extra incentive for them to help you out. So try all those avenues first. Then if you've exhausted all that and there's no connections at all, go ahead and apply to the position, right? The rule of thumb is that if you have at least 75 to 80% of the qualifications, go ahead and apply. It's interesting that there's been a lot of research out there that men will typically apply to a job as long as they have 50% of the qualifications. Women typically don't apply to a job until they have 85 or 90% of the qualifications. So the right number is somewhere in the middle there, right? Because if you only have half the qualifications and you apply to a job, not only are you going to be ignored, but you're also going to be looked at as someone who's just applying to anything out there, and you're going to really dilute your brand. So make sure you've got the bulk of the required, if you will, skill set and experience before you apply to a job. One of the questions that came through, I think early on, before this also from the registrants was about, how do you get through the applicant tracking system, which is the software that companies use. And we use it as well on the recruiting side. It's called an ATS, applicant tracking system. And that typically brings your resume into the software and will scan it for keywords that are relevant to the position. So make sure that in all cases and in all financial environments out there, that you are customizing your resume for each job you are applying to. Don't use one universal email or resume because every job that you look at, every job posting is going to have a little bit of a different nuance to it, different hot buttons and different relevant points. So you've got to make sure that you're changing your headline on your resume, you're changing the resume up to really reflect the qualifications that are in the job spec. So that way, when you do send your resume into that job, that software tracking system is going to pick up the keywords that you've included, which already reflect what the job description is asking for. So that's one of the things you want to definitely do. Other thing I would say is, if you're looking to, whether you're staying in the same industry or changing industries, make sure you're not including too much industry jargon in your resume. A lot of people fall into that trap where they're using acronyms left and right. And to them, it makes perfect sense because they've been doing that for many, many years. And in some cases, the folks that you send it to, if they're in that same exact industry sector, they may also understand it. But the vast majority of people out there are not going to have any idea what this acronym means. So either spell it out or find a more general, universal way to explain or describe what it is that you do. That's really important.
Great. So we have a lot of questions that are coming in through the chat, but one of them that is pertaining to what you just were speaking on is the initial application and or post-interview follow-up. When is the right time to follow up? Is enthusiasm and conscientiousness mistaken for aggressiveness and desperation at some points? So can you speak a little to that? And then I'd like to pivot and talk about social media in the job search and how everyone can best utilize that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I mean, in most cases, not every, but most cases, once you apply to a job online through your resume application, you will get some kind of acknowledgement or confirmation that they received your resume. Not everybody, but most companies have something like that. So assuming that you did get that confirmation, so they received your resume, you typically want to wait anywhere from 3 to 5 business days to follow up, right? You don't want to follow up and just say, hey, I want to make sure that you got the resume, because you already know that they did get it, excuse me, and they know that you also got the confirmation, so you don't want to do that. If you didn't get a confirmation and you sent a resume in and you want to know did they even receive it, then calling or emailing the next day is totally fine if you did not get that confirmation. As far as the cadence goes, it's hard to say for sure because every company is different. Some companies that have larger HR departments tend to be a little more guarded. And so they may not provide you with any kind of feedback, and they'll simply say, if you haven't heard from us, then you're not the right fit. And they may not even respond at all. The smaller companies typically don't have a dedicated in-house HR person. And so it's usually a little bit easier to get a hold of the actual hiring manager. And in that case, hopefully you can have a conversation with them. Not always, but you can at least leave a message. And then LinkedIn is always a great way to do it. Once you have applied to a job, you know who the hiring manager is, send a message through LinkedIn and reference that fact. Don't just invite them to connect with you without indicating why it is you're doing that. Make sure you indicate very clearly, I'm looking forward to connecting with you. I applied for this job. I think I'm a really good fit. I'm very excited about the prospect of talking to you. I've been following your company for a while. I'm really excited to hear more about it. Something engaging like that shows that you've done your due diligence. If there is some common connection that you have with that hiring manager, went to the same school, you both worked at IBM or Xerox or Amazon or whatever, try to find some way to include that common connection, if you will, that commonality in your LinkedIn message to them as well. So LinkedIn is a great way to follow up, once you've submitted your resume also. And then unfortunately, there's this term out there in recruiting called the black hole of resumes, which I wish it wasn't true, but it is. There are times, more often than you might like, that you send a resume to a company, you spend all this time filling out an application, and you never hear anything from them at all. There's no follow-up. There's no acknowledgement that they got the resume. So you have no idea what happened. And that's the part of relying solely on job postings that becomes very disheartening and very frustrating, because you can apply to 100 jobs and the average response rate, not even interview rate, but the average response rate is only 10%. So you can apply to 100 jobs online, and if you're lucky, you'll get 10 responses that just simply say, thank you for sending your resume in. So, with all the time you put into it, it's very frustrating. So you're much better off spending time building your network, trying to find a way to leverage that network to get your foot in the door.
So speaking of your network, can we talk a little bit more about LinkedIn? You mentioned following up via LinkedIn when people apply for a job, but how else can people better utilize that platform or any other social media platforms to be able to find a job and or hire and look for individuals for positions?
Yeah, that's a really good question to talk about. So one of the things that I look at, and I tell people to look at also, is that you can get a decent sense for the culture, the environment of the company based on LinkedIn. So before you apply to a job, let's say you're going to apply for a marketing director position, go into LinkedIn, pull up the employees that are working there, and get a sense for what their average tenures are. If they've been there for a long time, that's a pretty good sign that people, they go out there, they work there, they like it, they stay. If you're seeing a constant, kind of churn, if you will, where people are there 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half constantly, it's at least an orange flag, if not a red flag. So beware of that, definitely. You can also usually get a sense by looking at the backgrounds of people that are in that department that you're applying to. You can get a sense for what kinds of people do they typically hire. Do they come largely from big companies, from smaller companies, private or public? Is there a certain industry they tend to hire from? And then you can leverage that when you send your email in or when you do your follow-up and say, I noticed that you've hired a lot of people from wherever it might be, from ESET or from Rainbird or Amazon. I worked at that company for X number of years. I have some folks I know out there, and they say they have a lot of great things to say about your organization. So find ways to use that again, that common connecting point to better personalize the messaging that you send out there also. Megan, somebody asked a question, if you don't mind me touching on this, about, they had several interviews but haven't gotten an offer yet. So I want to bring this up because there's kind of different ways to look at it. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, Ken, I'm having a hard time finding a job, or if a company says, hey, Ken, we're having a hard time getting somebody to accept this job, I'll ask each of those constituents how far in the process they've gotten. If you're a job seeker and you're sending in lots of resumes and you never get even the first interview, you're probably either A, applying to the wrong job, or B, your resume is lacking in something. There's something that you're not clearly communicating, and so it's not coming across as being the right fit. If you and if you're a company and you're putting a job description online and only half a dozen people are applying, the job description probably needs a lot of work. And I see that quite often out there. Job specs are not really written very effectively in a lot of cases. And so you got to make sure that it's a compelling job description, especially today where people are more selective and discerning about which jobs they take on. If you're a job seeker and you've sent resumes in, you've gotten the first interview, but never moved on to round 2, now there's something going on with your interviewing, right? So either you're not speaking clearly, maybe you're not showing up professionally, maybe you embellished your resume to make it sound like you're the right fit, but then upon further clarification with the hiring manager, it's pretty obvious that you don't have that skill set. So that could be something there. If you've gotten all the way down to the end several times and you've always been number 2, in a lot of respects, that's kind of just kind of luck of the draw to a certain extent. But you can also ask companies, I know I was number 2. Would you mind sharing with me, what tipped the other candidate over in your favor versus me? You're not going to always get that feedback, but if you can get some feedback and use that the next time around, that's going to help also. If you're a company and you're getting to the offer stage and you're having candidates turn the offer down, either A, it's because the interviews that they did, they were not very impressed by their hiring manager or by the team, or the compensation level is below market. And we're seeing a lot of that right now also. So there's something there that's happening. Keep in mind, if you're a hiring manager, if you're a company, and you're saying, I'm pegging this position at 120,000. Well, that's great. But if all of the people out there that are in this job right now are already making 120,000, nobody is changing jobs for a lateral move right now. There's no reason to, especially with a pandemic going on. So if you peg the job at 120,000 and all the candidates are making that, you're going to have to bump your salary up by 10%. 10 to 15% is the typical bump or increase that a candidate will be expecting and getting to make that job change, right? So keep that in mind as a hiring manager as well.
Awesome. So a couple questions came in through the chat, but then also were something that we wanted to address was the topic of applying for jobs that are outside of where you're living right now. So a lot of people are making moves, they're going to live with mom and dad, they're going to live with their aunts and uncles or whatever it is. Or maybe just wanting to move to a different city, but are wondering what the best tips in making yourself marketable for jobs in that city. And furthermore, talking about salaries and how in one city you'll be making one amount and another city you might be making another, and how that works if you're going to an online virtual position.
Yeah, that's great. That could be an hour-long conversation just about that topic. It's a big topic of conversation right now in the recruiting world, and it's difficult. So on one hand, the ability to work from home now, because as I mentioned before, so many companies are now open to that. It's great because now you can apply to a job anywhere. The challenge is that you're now also competing with people that are everywhere, right? You're not just competing with folks that are in your own backyard anymore. It's a national kind of competition now, if you will. So there's pros and cons. But again, back to my points earlier about networking, try to find a way to find a common connection. Maybe you've got a family member in that city. Maybe you lived there as a kid, whatever it might be. Try to find some compelling reason, if you will, to make you stand out among the candidates that are already local. Companies will always, even in today's situation, companies will still always defer to local people because they feel like there's less of a risk there, right? They're already in the local area. They know the company. They know they're in their own backyard. It's easier for them to come in for an all hands meeting, if you will, or for sales training and that kind of thing. So from that respect, they're always going to defer. They're always going to prefer those candidates. But that being said, they are much more willing to consider candidates from out of the area if it's a compelling reason, not just compensation level, but also if that person's a really, really good fit. So keep that in mind also. In terms of standing out, again, it's all the things that I said before. Make sure that your resume really reflects the important aspects of the job description, right? Make sure that you are kind of explaining or describing in your email or cover letter to them the importance of you wanting to work there, or kind of the reason why they should want to hire you, no matter where you happen to be located. That's really important also. So again, just find ways to stand out and really make sure that you are applying to the right kinds of positions. The worst thing you can do is, let's say it's a bigger company and they have 5 different openings and you apply to all 5. That really does you a disservice, because now they think that you think you're qualified for anything out there. And that's not the case. Nobody can be a good fit for 5 different jobs at the same company. It's just not possible. But know that companies, when you apply to one job, their system will actually attach your resume to all the jobs that are relevant, that are fit for you. So you don't have to apply to all 5 jobs. Once you go into one, you're considered for all 5 as well. So keep that in mind. On the compensation piece, it's a really tricky subject right now. It's tough. So there's about, I think there's the latest count, there's about 13 states, including California, that have enacted laws where employers and recruiters alike, we are no longer allowed to ask somebody what they are currently making. We can't ask for W-2s. We can't ask for verification. So you have to look up and see what states they are, but there's about 12 or 14 now. So that's challenging, because I don't know if I'm going to offer you a bump in salary, or it's going to be a lateral, or it's a step down, because I don't have any benchmark to go off of, right? So keep that in mind. But it's incumbent upon you and the company to make sure that you are valuing your skills at the right level, right? If you're making $150,000 in Silicon Valley and you've got 5 years of experience, which is the reality right now, if you move to Nebraska or Austin or Nashville, you're not going to be, your cost of living is so much less than living in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. There's no way you're going to get that same compensation. So you need to figure out, you need to use online tools to figure out, okay, so what is the variance, if you will, the kind of the calculator to figure out what's the cost of living in Nashville versus Silicon Valley. And then you should ask for a compensation level that's commensurate with that cost of living where you are actually living, not where the company is based. You guys, you all may have read the articles over the last 45 days or so a lot of companies, a lot of the big tech companies especially, are saying on one hand, they're letting even their current employees move wherever they want, but they're making it very clear that there's going to be an adjustment down in compensation level. I think what I read was going from the Bay Area to Denver, the compensation level is about 18% lower. Going from the Bay Area to San Diego, it's about 8% lower. So there's different, kind of formulas out there that are being used. But just keep that in mind, because you don't want to come across as being greedy and asking for too much money because you're using the wrong foundation.
I think that's really good to know, especially for individuals who are on this call who are looking for a career change too, right? They might be expecting one salary based off of what they did in the past, but are unfamiliar, unaware of what a job in a new industry, what that salary would look like. So can we talk about that before? Looks like we're running up on our time, but we have a little bit more time at the end to answer some questions. So before that, can you speak to individuals who are looking for a career change, especially right now? What are some tips for them? And anything that you can provide.
Sure, yeah. So there are, there are what's called career coaches out there. So my firm is a recruiting firm and we're a search firm. So we don't provide career coaching services to help individual candidates with job changes or industry changes or resume writing, that kind of thing. But there are folks out there that do that specifically. And I know a couple. If you want any referrals, I can certainly refer you. And they will help you if you're looking to change industries. If you've been at the same company for 10, 12, 15, 20 years, and you're not sure how to go about doing an effective job search, or you're in a job search for the first time in your entire career, those career coaches will be very, very helpful and very and impactful as well for your job search. So those folks are certainly out there. In terms of changing industries, it's always tough to do that even in the best of times. The odds of a recruiter like me being able to place you in a position if you're changing industries, it's pretty small. And it makes sense because companies come to us, they hire us because they want us to find people that have been there and done that. They don't want someone who's going from banking and for 20 years in banking who now wants to be in biotech. They're not hiring us to find that person, right? So just be aware of the industries that are more of a natural transition. Going from banking to biotech is going to be very, very difficult. Life sciences as a whole, biotech, pharma, medtech, that tends to be somewhat incestuous. They prefer people coming from their own, kind of industry backyard, if you will. It's not impossible, but it's harder to break into a life science company. Technology in general is a little easier. If you are, for example, in banking and you want to go into fintech, well, now that's a natural transition, right? Because you have an understanding of the financial world, the SEC regulations out there. There's a good fit there. So just be aware of what the hot buttons and what the kind of dynamics are of that new industry that you're going into. Be aware of that so you can speak to that when you are networking and trying to get your foot in the door. You are going to almost have to rely on some kind of a referral introduction if you are completely changing industries. The odds of you sending your resume in for a job when it's a totally different industry than where you've been historically, the odds of you getting an interview are pretty slim, probably about 5% to 8%. So just be aware of that and try to find ways, again, to build out that network. One of the things when I did coaching years ago, and I would tell people to make a list, kind of take a personal inventory of their current network. So go to LinkedIn, for example, look at all the folks that you have there and figure out, okay, so what industries do I have well represented? What functions do I have well represented? And what levels of experience, more senior, junior, whatever it might be. And then look for the gaps, right? If you realize that you want to go into fintech and all of your contacts are in manufacturing for whatever reason, it's time to start focusing on building up your network in that fintech space. And that will then dictate who you go after in LinkedIn that you want to add to your network, right? Then you can go into LinkedIn, for example, do a search for people that are in fintech, that are in Colorado, that went to USD. I mean, as you all know, you can slice and dice LinkedIn so many different ways that it's a really fascinating tool, a very powerful tool to help you identify those people.
Great. Well, Ken, it looks like we're just about at our time. So I wanted to make sure that we got through everything that we wanted to chat about. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we jump into a couple more questions in the chat?
No, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. I'd like to kind of answer the questions that they have that are burning questions right now. Let's go with that.
Perfect. All right. We already did a couple already, but and forgive me, everyone who's on the call, I might go a little out of order, but It is what I see. So the first question I have for you is, why don't employers disclose salary ranges in job descriptions?
Yeah,
And if
so
they did, it would help applicants better determine what would be compensated appropriately based on their experience.
yeah, I completely agree. I think companies should do a better job of disclosing that. And that's part of the new law that I mentioned before in those 12, 14 states, is that companies are in those states are now required to include what's called a salary band or a salary range in their job descriptions. And if they don't include it, you are legally able and allowed to ask the question too. But it would make things a whole heck of a lot easier if they did it for everybody, but that's not the case right now. So I don't really have an answer as to why they don't. They just don't. And it's never really been a common practice. But you can use, there are some online tools. We do a salary guide for sales and marketing professionals at all levels. I'm happy to share that with you if you're interested. But there are other companies out there that will do the same kind of thing, whether it's salary.com, or you can look at Glassdoor. Again, take that with a grain of salt, but it's one data point. Robert Half has some decent ones depending upon what functions you're looking at. So try to get a hold of a salary guide from one of the recruiting companies out there. That's a good tool to use also.
Great. Mike wrote in saying that he has applied for 30 positions via Indeed, but still no interviews have occurred. Do you believe in Indeed?
Do I believe in Indeed? It's a great question. So yes, but I'll kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and tell you how companies work. So anytime a company has a new job opening, they always put it up on Indeed or Monster or whatever it might be, right? However, there's what we call a pile A and a pile B of resumes. Pile B, right, is the one that you don't want to be in. Pile B is all the people that have applied through Indeed or the job posting somewhere, right? And that's usually a pretty large stack, anywhere from 200 to 500 resumes, right? Pile A is where you want to be. Pile A of resumes are the resumes that the hiring manager looks at first. And pile A is comprised of people that got referred in by a current employee, by a trusted advisor. There's some connection there with regard to the things I mentioned before about why you're a good fit for that. That is the select pile. You want to be in pile A, right? I'm amazed at how often there will be companies that will put up a posting on Indeed and they never even take even a single glance at that pile B. They just don't, and they hire somebody from pile A. So that's why, again, it's so important to really build and then leverage your network and rely on that much more so than Indeed. And then I would just refer back to what I said earlier also. If you apply to 30 positions and you haven't gotten anything at all, either A, your resume needs some work, right? And you can look at, we have a resume template on our website you're welcome to take a look at, or you're applying to the wrong kinds of positions where your skill set is not translating to be a fit for that particular position.
You chatted earlier about resumes, tweaking them, making them specific, but one individual wrote in asking the difference between what you prefer on bulk resume, writing resumes in bulk, or making them specific and targeted, but also weighing in the factor of time and availability and how many jobs you're applying to. So can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So, and just to kind of clarify what I meant, you don't have to completely rewrite your resume for every job, right? 80%, 85% of your resume is going to be the same for everyone, but it's really important to tweak that 15 to 20% to customize it for that position. It might mean that, one resume says marketing leader, and then the next job you're applying for is for a much larger company. And so you're not looking for a leadership position because it's a much bigger company. So it might just say marketing professional. Those kinds of tweaks that I'm talking about. One role might be if you're in sales, for example, you might apply as a sales leader, right? So you're going to manage a team. So you're going to be adding in the fact on your resume that you've managed teams in the past, right? Another role might be an individual contributor role where it's not a leadership position. And in that case, your resume is going to reflect all the things that you did to meet and beat your quota, and sales that you've had and clients that you've closed, and you're going to de-emphasize the leadership side. So those are the tweaks I'm talking about. Because you're right, time is of the essence, and you don't have time to spend to rewrite your resume completely every single time.
Vienna wrote in saying, should a person remain unemployed long-term rather than seek a different industry/path? Will building a stronger network decrease unemployment time?
So long term, yes, building a strong network will increase your unemployment over the long term. So the next time you're in transition, it'll be easier to find a job if you've spent time building that network up. It's I mean, there's no hard and fast rule as far as the amount of time. I would say, there are ways to remain relevant even when you're in job search mode. You can volunteer very easily. You can do consulting, and it could be pro bono free consulting, but you're helping out an entrepreneur that you know or somebody else, where you're providing some content if you're a marketing person or what have you. Something that you can use to add to your resume, even if it's not a paid position, that's okay. And so while you're building up your network, you're also then kind of keeping your skills sharp, if you will, to do some work there as well. So there's no hard and fast rule about the amount of time, but overall, over the course of your career, yes, the time that you put into building out your network will, without question, come back in spades in terms of being a benefit for you longer term.
Are cover letters a thing of the past? I feel like no one reads them, but I'm old school and always include one that is specific to the position.
Yeah, they are definitely old school. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I read a cover letter, and mainly because cover letters for decades and decades, all they've done is just repeat what your resume says. There's nothing different or new in there, right? And typically, your email that you're sending to them or your LinkedIn message to the hiring manager, that's going to really kind of serve as a truncated version of your cover letter. Now, if, for example, you are relocating, so you're in San Diego now, but you're applying for a job in Austin and you're planning on relocating there by X date, then definitely include that in your email message, or in your LinkedIn connection request, those kind of things also. But by and large, cover letters, you don't need them. There are some companies that require them still when you apply to a job online. It's pretty antiquated. Maybe some government jobs might do that, I'm not sure. But yeah, cover letters are definitely a thing of the past.
All right, one question that came in through registration but is not in the chat is, how do I beef up my resume and make myself marketable when I may have less experience than what they're looking for?
Yeah, good question. So if they're asking for 10 years of experience and you've got 3, that's kind of a big disconnect there. But if they're asking for 5 years and you've got 3, then you're more than qualified to apply to that position. Just make sure that you are looking at the job description, looking at the company website, doing some industry research about that organization and about that industry, and that you're including relevant things that you've done on your resume to beef it up, right? Things that you can do, like special projects that you were involved in, times where you were asked by a different department that you didn't actually work for, but you were asked to help out with a different project. So that cross training is really important. The fact that you were working, part-time or full-time while going to school, putting yourself through school, that shows a really strong work ethic and also a sense of responsibility as well. It goes a very, very long way. If you are volunteering, let's say you have a full-time job, but you're also volunteering at your church or your kid's school or whatever, include that in there as well under additional activities section, because it'll show that you're obviously doing different things. You're able to juggle multiple responsibilities. So again, it depends upon how much of a difference there is in expectation in what you're applying to, but within 2 to 3 years of what they're asking for, you should still apply, definitely.
Alrighty, Valerie wrote in, given the fact that we're in a pandemic, how can you tell whether a workplace prioritizes its employees' health or not, and should they during a pandemic be willing to give more sick leaves these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's so all over the place. From company to company, it changes quite a bit. On one hand, yes, you would think you'd want to have more sick days. On the other hand, if you're working from home all the time, it's easier to take a sick time or work only half a day, right? I have not seen any changes among companies so far in terms of changing their total PTO. I have not seen that. I have seen more companies that are closing this year between the holidays, between Christmas and New Year's. Even companies that are non-manufacturing, usually it's more manufacturing type companies, but I know of a number of service companies as well that have chosen to close to give people more time with their family, that kind of thing. In terms of knowing, how the company is or whether or not they are, health centric for their employees, it's really hard to know. You can ask questions, in such a way where it's not threatening. You can say, so how has the pandemic, how has COVID changed your operations, right? And see how they respond to that. Or, have you had more employees that have decided to work from home versus come back to the office, and how has that affected your operation? So you can get a feel for, based on how they respond, and really kind of how transparent they are. You can get a feel from that about how they're treating their employees. And then again, look at Glassdoor, look at online reviews. If you find someone in the company that you are connected to in LinkedIn, give them a call and just ask the question, hey, how has it been out there since COVID? How's the company treating their employees, that kind of thing.
Alrighty, 2 more questions for you. We're
Sure.
coming up on our time. What are some tips to make your LinkedIn profile more visible to recruiters?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the quick question is, if you have the skills that I'm looking for as a recruiter, I really don't care whether or not you have a open networker badge or a job seeker badge or whatever badge you want to talk about. It doesn't matter. What I care about as a recruiter is the skill set. Do you have the right skill set to fill the job I'm trying to fill? So in that sense, you want to focus on making sure that your LinkedIn profile really reflects the skills, the experiences that are going to be relevant for the kind of job that you're looking for. Now, one caveat is that, as I said before, you can customize your resume for every job that you apply to. You can't change and customize your LinkedIn profile. You've got one shot at it. So again, do away with all the industry jargon, make sure it's more broad-based, make sure you're including things that are individual contributor type skills and successes, but also leadership if you're looking for either one of those jobs. If you've worked in IT and operations and you're open to a job in either of those departments, make sure that your LinkedIn profile talks about your skill set and your successes in both IT and operations. If you are applying primarily to companies that are small, either early stage or startup, then make sure that's part of your profile also. One quick note I'll make is that if you haven't already, you should be customizing your headline. Your headline is right below your name. A lot of people don't even realize that you can customize that. If you don't customize it, it defaults to your most recent position. But when you go into your edit profile mode, there'll be a little pencil next to your name, and you can edit that. It used to be 140 characters for that headline. They recently increased it. I think it's about 160 to 170 now. But you want to put relevant keywords, if you will, into that headline. Take a look at mine. You'll get a sense. It's pretty obvious when you look at mine, what my profession is. Same should be the case for you. Talk about marketing, talk about sales or operations or quality or accounting. Talk about the kinds of companies that you work for. Talk about the fact that you're a manager or a leader, or that you've raised money, or that you've been involved in M&A transactions. So all of those keywords need to be in your headline also. That'll definitely make you stand out.
All right, last question is, how do you make your resume stick out when you have a gap period? A handful of individuals on this chat have been unemployed for some time, maybe even beyond the pandemic. So what are your recommendations for that?
Yeah, so again, if you've been doing any kind of volunteering or any kind of pro bono work, add that to your resume. That's totally fine. If you've been taking care of elderly parents, which is pretty common these days, you can also put that in there. Just indicate. I mean, it's much more common today than when it was even 5-10 years ago. So if that's the case, you can also put that in there as well. There's no way to eliminate it, right? It is what it is. You don't want to change the dates around of your last position. That's not okay. But you can find ways to put volunteer work in there, no matter what it might have been, and add it that way also, and just kind of try to find a way to explain it. And again, back to my point before, if you're sending your resume in through a job posting, you don't really have much of a chance to explain any kind of a gap. If instead you're talking to someone that you know at the company and you're asking them to share your resume with the hiring manager, then they're going to know your story. And that person's going to kind of be your advocate at the company to hopefully help you secure that first interview. So again, that's why networking is so important.